Have you ever felt that boiling rage when someone keeps stealing what belongs to you? Imagine ordering something important, something you paid for with your own money, only to find it missing from your porch. At first you think it's just a mistake, maybe a delivery problem. But when it happens again and again, the truth hits like a hammer. Someone is stealing from you. That's exactly what I went through. And worse, it wasn't some random thief, it was my entitled neighbors, 2 sisters, everyone called the Karen sisters. These women acted like the entire neighborhood belonged to them. They cut in line at the grocery store, yelled at kids for playing outside, and always made sure their noses were in other people's business. But stealing my packages, that was the final straw. I caught them on my security camera, laughing while walking away with a box that clearly had my name on it. My blood boiled, but instead of confronting them, I decided to get creative. I wasn't going to call the cops and let it drag out. No, I was going to make them regret ever touching my stuff. So, I ordered a special delivery, a harmless one, but one that would leave a permanent scar on their entitled behavior, because inside that box wasn't what they thought inside was, a living nightmare. That would make them scream louder than they ever had before. When the moment came, it was better than I could have imagined. Their shrieks echoed through the street as they tore the box open, only to be met with what they feared most. My revenge was complete, and for once the entire neighborhood saw the Karens get exactly what they deserved. The first time it happened, I honestly thought it was a simple mistake. I had ordered a small package, nothing big, just a set of kitchen utensils I'd been meaning to replace for months. The delivery app showed the package as delivered, yet when I went outside to check, my porch was empty. No box, no sign of the delivery driver. I even checked behind the bushes and under the little side table I kept outside, thinking maybe they'd hidden it from sight. But no, there was nothing. At first I shrugged it off. Maybe the driver had left it at the wrong address. It wouldn't have been the first time a package ended up 2 houses down, and one of my neighbors would usually bring it by later in the day. So, I went on with my evening, convinced that the situation would sort itself out. But by the next morning there was still nothing. No knock on the door, no text, no package. Frustrated, I filed a complaint with the delivery company, got my refund, and let it slide. I told myself it was just one of those random annoyances that came with modern life. But when it happened again 2 weeks later, I started to grow suspicious. This time, the package was a pair of wireless earbuds. Not expensive, but not cheap either. Once again, the app said it had been delivered. Once again, I opened my door only to find my porch bare. My stomach sank. Twice couldn't be a coincidence. I felt that gnawing feeling at the back of my mind, the kind of itch you can't quite scratch. Something wasn't right. I decided to ask around the neighborhood. I casually mentioned to a couple of neighbors that my packages had gone missing, and to my surprise, more than one of them said they'd had similar issues. Some joked about porch pirates, while others admitted they had started getting deliveries sent to their workplace instead of home. I realized then that this wasn't just a one-off mistake. Someone in the area was taking what didn't belong to them. It didn't take long before I noticed a pattern. Every time a package disappeared from my porch, I'd see the same 2 women outside on the street. They were sisters who lived 3 houses down, though no one called them by their actual names. To everyone, they were simply known as the Karen sisters. They had earned the nickname through years of entitled behavior, arguing with store clerks, reporting kids for riding bikes too close to their yard, and even filing noise complaints if someone dared mow their lawn before 10 a.m. They were the type of neighbors who could ruin a sunny afternoon just by stepping outside. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. They always seemed to be hanging around at just the right time. They never worked, always lounging on their porch with sour expressions, sipping iced tea like queens surveying their kingdom. I remembered one particular afternoon when I had received a delivery. Not even 10 minutes after the truck left, I saw one of the sisters' hair frizzed, oversized sunglasses perched on her face, walking down the sidewalk with a box tucked under her arm. The box was plain, but my gut told me it was mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the image over and over. My chest burned with frustration. Who did they think they were? Just waltzing up to my porch and helping themselves. I thought about confronting them, but I knew how that would go. The Karen sisters weren't the type to admit guilt. No, they'd twist the story, claim they were holding it for me or just checking if it had been abandoned. Worse, they'd probably make a scene in front of the whole neighborhood, painting me as the unreasonable one. So, I decided I needed proof. If I could catch them in the act, then I'd finally have the leverage to shut them down for good. That weekend, I installed a small security camera above my porch. It wasn't fancy, just a little device I'd picked up online, but it was enough to give me peace of mind. From then on, every package delivery was being watched. Days went by without incident, and I almost began to think maybe I had been wrong. Maybe it wasn't them after all. But then it happened. I had ordered a box of books, and the delivery came in the late afternoon. I got the notification, checked my camera feed, and there it was, my package, sitting neatly on the porch. I decided to wait a few minutes before going out, just to see what would happen. Not 15 minutes later, the feed lit up again, and there they were. The Karen sisters, both of them, striding up my walkway like they owned the place. One of them looked around, probably checking if anyone was watching, while the other bent down and scooped up my box without hesitation. They didn't even try to be sneaky. The entire theft played out right in front of my camera. They even laughed as they walked off, muttering something I couldn't quite hear. I sat in my chair, fists clenched, teeth grinding. The proof was right there. They were the thieves. They had been stealing from me and, likely from everyone else, for months. My chest thumped with anger, but beneath the anger, a spark of satisfaction flared. Finally, I had them. Finally, I could do something about it. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. Something inside me wanted more than just a simple report and a slap on the wrist. These women had strutted around the neighborhood for too long, untouchable, smug, and cruel. They deserved something more than a warning. They deserved to feel the same frustration, the same helplessness that they had been causing everyone else. That night, I stared at the footage over and over, plotting my next move. If they wanted to keep stealing my packages, then I was going to give them a package they would never forget. And with that thought, the plan for my revenge began to take shape. The idea came to me late at night as I sat in front of my computer, replaying the footage of the Karen sisters stealing my box of books. Their smug laughter still echoed in my ears, and each time I saw them walking away with my package, my blood boiled hotter. I didn't just want to stop them, I wanted to humiliate them, to give them a taste of their own medicine. At first I considered simple things. Maybe filling a box with bricks so it would be too heavy to carry off. Maybe setting a glitter bomb inside so when they opened it, they'd be showered in sparkling humiliation. I even looked up tutorials for dye packs, like the ones used in banks. Each idea made me smirk for a moment, but none of them felt satisfying enough. These women needed something unforgettable, something that would make them hesitate every single time they looked at a package that wasn't theirs. That's when the memory hit me. A week earlier, I had been cleaning out my shed when I found a small family of rats scurrying around inside. They weren't aggressive, just startled. And I had ended up catching a couple in humane traps before releasing them into the field near the woods. The thought suddenly struck like lightning: what if I didn't release the next ones? What if the Karens opened a stolen box and found it full of squeaking, scratching rats? The idea was perfect. It wasn't dangerous. Not really. The rats wouldn't hurt them, but they would cause chaos. I could already imagine the shrieking, the panicked scrambling, the disgust etched across their entitled faces. The entire neighborhood would hear it, and no amount of excuses would save them from the embarrassment. Of course, I had doubts. Was it too far? Was it cruel? I sat with the idea for hours, debating with myself. But then I thought of the packages I had lost, the money I had wasted, and the smug way they laughed as they carried my belongings away. Suddenly, the doubt faded. They had chosen to steal. They had chosen to take what wasn't theirs. All I was doing was giving them exactly what they asked for, just not in the way they expected. The next few days, I set my plan into motion. I baited my humane traps in the shed and garage, waiting patiently. Sure enough, within a day, I had caught 3 healthy, squirming rats. I kept them in a small pet carrier with food and water, making sure they were safe but contained. Every time I glanced at the box and saw their beady little eyes, I imagined them racing across the Karen's carpet, darting under their furniture, scratching at their perfect sense of control. It made me smile every time. Then came the box. I chose one about the size of a shoebox, sturdy but light enough to carry. I carefully poked small air holes in the sides so the rats could breathe once I transferred them. I lined it with shredded paper so it looked like packing material. To make it look authentic, I printed out a fake shipping label and taped it on. It looked just like any ordinary delivery. For 2 days, the box sat in my living room, prepared and ready. But I wanted to make sure the timing was right. I studied the delivery schedule in my area, noticing that packages usually arrived in the afternoon, between 2 and 4. That's when the Karens were almost always outside, sipping their drinks and pretending to be watchdogs of the street. They would see it sitting there, and like moths to a flame, they wouldn't be able to resist. On the day of the plan, I woke up with a mix of nerves and excitement. My stomach twisted, my hands shook slightly, but my mind was clear. This was the day. I placed the rat-filled box carefully on my porch just after lunch, making sure it was in plain view. From my window, I had a perfect vantage point, with my camera rolling as backup. Then I waited. The minutes dragged like hours. Every car that passed made my pulse race. Every laugh I heard outside made me tense. And then, finally, I saw them. The Karen sisters strolled down the street like they always did, scanning left and right as though the whole neighborhood were theirs to patrol. One of them nudged the other and pointed at my porch. My heart leaped into my throat. It was happening. They glanced around, checking if anyone was watching. They didn't notice me peeking through my blinds, and they certainly didn't realize that my camera was recording every second. With their usual arrogance, they strutted up to my porch, their fake smiles plastered across their faces in case anyone glanced their way. One sister bent down, lifted the box and gave it a little shake. She smirked, probably thinking it was something valuable inside. Without hesitation, they tucked it under their arm and walked off. heading back toward their house. I nearly burst out laughing right there. The trap had been set, and they had walked straight into it. My only regret was that I wouldn't be inside their house to see the exact moment they opened it. But I didn't have to wait long to hear the result. Barely 2 minutes later, the sound hit the air, a shrill, blood-curdling scream, followed by another and another. It was the kind of scream you only hear in horror movies, high-pitched and panicked, echoing through the street. I ran to my window, biting down on my fist to keep from laughing too loudly. The door of their house flew open, and one of the sisters came bolting outside, shrieking and flailing her arms. Behind her, the other one was hopping up and down, yelling something incoherent as a rat darted across their porch and scurried into the bushes. But chaos was everything I had imagined and more, and that was just the beginning. The sound of that first scream was like music to my ears. It was sharp, drawn out, and filled with pure panic. I had been waiting for that exact sound, and when it came, it exceeded my expectations. The Karen sisters weren't just startled, they were horrified. Their shrieks cut through the neighborhood like sirens, pulling curious neighbors out of their houses, peeking over fences, and stepping onto porches to see what was going on. I pressed my face closer to the window, my heart racing as I tried to hold in my laughter. Through the blinds, I saw one sister burst through her front door, arms flailing as though her skin were on fire. She hopped from one foot to the other, shrieking, "Get it off me! Get it off!" Her oversized sunglasses flew off her face and clattered onto the porch. Hot on her heels came the other sister, broom in hand, swinging wildly at something invisible. Her hair was disheveled, her expression one of sheer terror. Then I saw it, a little brown rat darting across their porch, slipping between the wooden slats of their railing before disappearing into the bushes. Another one shot out right behind it, skittering across the sidewalk and causing a couple of kids on bikes to swerve away with startled yelps. The chaos was absolute. Neighbors started gathering, some clutching their stomachs with laughter, others covering their mouths in shock. Mrs. Peterson from across the street leaned on her cane, grinning ear to ear as she muttered, "Well, it's about time those two got what's coming to them." I had never seen so many people in the neighborhood smiling at the same time. Meanwhile, the Karens were completely losing it. One of them, the taller one, was still inside the house, her voice shrieking through the open doorway. "They're everywhere. They're in the kitchen." Pots clanged, something heavy crashed to the floor. And then came another scream that sounded like someone had spotted a ghost. A moment later, she burst outside, holding a mop like a spear, her face pale as chalk dot by now. A third rat had emerged from the house, scurrying down their steps as though it, too, wanted nothing more to do with the Karens. The neighbors erupted in laughter, pointing and whispering. A few even pulled out their phones to record the scene. I could already imagine the videos going viral online, titled something like "Entitled Sisters Get Rat Surprise." I had to sit down to keep from doubling over in laughter. My plan had worked better than I ever imagined. I didn't just hear their screams, I heard the sound of their arrogance shattering. The sisters, however, weren't finding it funny. One of them stomped around the yard, yelling at the top of her lungs, "Who did this? Who did this?" Her voice cracked with both rage and fear. The other one stood frozen near the sidewalk, her broom trembling in her hands, eyes darting everywhere like she expected another rat to leap at her any second. That was when Mr. Alvarez, who lived next door to them, stepped outside with his phone held high, still recording. "It looks like you've got some porch pirates biting back," he said with a grin. His voice carried across the street, and the crowd burst into laughter again. The Karens' faces turned red, but they were too flustered to respond. One of them screeched something about calling the police, but it only made the neighbors laugh harder. Police for what? Rats. Everyone knew they had been stealing packages. No one would take their side now. Inside their house I could hear more clattering, drawers opening, cabinets slamming shut. It seemed the rats had scattered everywhere, making themselves right at home. The taller sister rushed back inside for a moment, only to come running out again seconds later, holding what looked like a frying pan. "They're in the cupboards," she wailed. Her voice cracked so high it almost sounded comical. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head in disbelief. I hadn't expected it to spiral this far, but watching their empire of entitlement crumble in broad daylight felt like justice in its purest form. For the next half hour, the chaos continued. The sisters tried everything, sweeping, banging pots, spraying something from a can, even tossing water across their kitchen floor. But the rats, clever little creatures that they were, darted from corner to corner, always staying one step ahead. From where I sat, I could still hear the shrieks and slamming sounds, each one feeding my sense of triumph. Eventually pest control was called. A white van pulled up, and two men in uniforms stepped out with traps and gear. The Karens swarmed them immediately, pointing and yelling, their arms flailing dramatically. The exterminators exchanged looks that clearly said, "We've seen this type before." The taller of the two sighed and went inside with his equipment while the other set up traps outside. The neighborhood audience slowly dispersed, though not without smirks and whispered jokes. Everyone had witnessed the fall of the self-proclaimed queens of the street. I knew, in that moment, that the Karens' reputation had taken a blow they would never recover from. As the van doors closed and the pest control team drove off, The sisters stood on their porch, disheveled and humiliated. Their hair stuck out at odd angles, their clothes were wrinkled, and their faces were twisted with barely contained rage. They scanned the street, their eyes narrowing at anyone who dared to look their way. I quickly ducked away from the window before they could spot me. My laughter still bubbled in my chest, but I forced myself to stay quiet, let them stew in their humiliation. They didn't know for sure who had set them up, and that uncertainty would gnaw at them almost as much as the rats had as evening fell. I stepped out onto my porch, feigning innocence as I watered my plants. A couple of neighbors waved at me knowingly, their grins saying what words didn't need to. For once, there was a sense of unity on the street, as though we had all silently agreed that justice had finally been served. The Karens, however, avoided eye contact. They hurried back inside with their arms crossed tightly, muttering under their breath. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by embarrassment and paranoia. I knew they wouldn't dare touch another package again, and as I stood there, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, I realized something. My revenge hadn't just been personal, it had been for the entire neighborhood. And the best part, it wasn't over yet. For the next few days, the street felt different, quieter, almost peaceful. The Karen sisters had gone from strutting around like watchdogs to hiding behind their curtains. I noticed their blinds twitch whenever someone walked past, as if they were keeping surveillance on the entire block, but they didn't step outside. Not once, at first. I thought maybe the lesson had been enough, that the rats had broken their pride so thoroughly they'd retreat into their little kingdom of bitterness and leave the rest of us alone. But entitled people don't give up that easily. The Karens weren't just embarrassed, they were enraged. And nothing is more dangerous than a pair of entitled sisters with a bruised ego. It started with the glares. Whenever I went out to collect my mail or water the plants, I'd catch one of them peering through the window, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. Their eyes burned with suspicion, scanning me like they were trying to read my soul. They didn't have proof, of course, but deep down, I think they knew. I had always been the one complaining about stolen packages. I had installed a camera. I had motive, but without evidence, all they could do was stew in their paranoia. By the third day they began venturing outside again, not with their usual arrogance. This time it was different. They stood on their porch like soldiers guarding a castle, arms crossed, eyes darting to every passing car. They even shouted at a delivery truck that parked across the street, accusing the driver of trespassing. The poor guy looked completely baffled as he dropped off a box at Mrs. Peterson's house. The sisters were desperate to reclaim their power. Their first attempt was laughable. They held a neighborhood meeting. They stood at the end of their driveway, clapping their hands and calling everyone over like they were leading some official gathering. Most people ignored them. A handful wandered over out of curiosity. But I stayed at my window, watching. From what I could hear, the Karens spun some wild story about being the victims of a hate crime. They claimed someone had planted rats in a box to deliberately terrorize them, and they demanded everyone be on alert. This is a violation of safety. One of them screeched, her voice shrill. We are being targeted. The neighbors exchanged amused glances. No one believed them. In fact, I noticed more than a few smirks, as though everyone knew exactly why the sisters had suffered their rat invasion. Mr. Alvarez, never one to hold back, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if you stopped stealing packages, no one would have to teach you a lesson. The crowd chuckled, and the Karens' faces turned crimson. Their little rally collapsed within minutes, leaving them huffing angrily on their driveway as everyone walked away. But humiliation only seemed to harden their resolve. By the end of the week, they had turned their paranoia into action. New security cameras appeared on the corners of their house, pointing in every direction like watchful eyes. Motion sensor lights flashed on and off at random, startling anyone who walked by after dusk. They even put up a handwritten sign on their porch that read, "Under surveillance. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." The irony nearly made me choke with laughter. These were the same women who had stolen from half the neighborhood, now pretending to be victims of crime. But beneath my amusement, I also felt a flicker of caution. They weren't just angry anymore, they were watching, and I had a strong sense they wouldn't stop until they figured out who had embarrassed them. One evening, as I sat on my porch enjoying a rare moment of calm, I heard their voices drifting from down the street. They weren't even trying to be quiet. It was him, one of them hissed. It has to be. He's the one always complaining about his packages. But how do we prove it? The other replied, we can't just accuse him. We'll look crazy. You think we don't already look crazy? The first one snapped. We'll watch him. We'll catch him slipping. My stomach tightened. They were circling closer to the truth. While they had no evidence, their suspicion alone could make my life miserable if they decided to act on it. And act they did. The very next morning, I caught them standing at the edge of my yard, pretending to admire the flowers. Their eyes weren't on the plants, they were on me. When I stepped outside, they plastered on fake smiles. Lovely day, isn't it? One of them said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Sure is, I replied flatly. Locking my front door behind me, they exchanged a look as if waiting for me to crack, to slip up and confess. But I kept my expression calm, neutral. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. Over the next few days, their little surveillance game escalated. They loitered near my property line, pretended to walk their non-existent dog past my house, and even slowed their car whenever they drove by, staring at me through the windows. It was harassment in the most petty form, but I refused to flinch. Inside, though I was already thinking ahead. If they wanted to play games, I could play better. They had no idea that my camera had recorded every one of their thefts. They had no clue that I had a library of proof just waiting for the right moment. Still, a small voice inside me whispered caution. I had humiliated them once, but entitled people don't forgive and forget. They plot, they scheme, and if I wasn't careful, they might try to turn the neighborhood against me. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the balance between revenge and escalation. My prank had been harmless in the end, just a few frightened screams and a bruised ego. But the Karens were desperate to claw back their power, and I could feel the storm brewing. The next chapter of this feud wasn't going to be funny. It was going to be war, and I knew one thing for certain. I had to be ready. The tension between me and the Karen sisters simmered like a pot about to boil over. Their suspicion had grown into obsession. Every time I stepped outside, I felt their eyes on me. They watched from their windows, from their porch, even from the sidewalk as they pretended to check the mail. The whole neighborhood noticed, and whispers spread. People joked that the Karens had turned into amateur detectives. But their paranoia wasn't enough. They wanted revenge. And one Saturday morning, they tried to get it. I had just settled on my couch with a cup of coffee when I heard banging on my front door. Loud, angry, relentless. I set the mug down and opened the door cautiously, and there they were, the Karen sisters, both of them standing with their arms crossed, faces red with fury. "We know it was you," the taller one snapped before I could even say hello. "Excuse me," I said calmly, though my heart started beating faster. "The rat's the box. You think you're clever, but we know you're the one who planted that package." The other spat, jabbing her finger at me like she was a prosecutor in a courtroom. I leaned against the doorframe, raising an eyebrow. "That's a pretty wild accusation. Do you have any proof?" They exchanged a quick glance, their confidence wavering for a second. Then the taller sister blurted out, "We don't need proof. Everyone knows it was you, and we're going to tell the HOA. We'll have you fined, maybe even evicted." I almost laughed. The audacity was astounding. They had stolen from me, from the neighborhood, and now they were threatening me with punishment. But instead of losing my temper, I smiled at calm, a steady smile that made them falter. "Actually," I said, "I'm glad you brought this up, because I've been meaning to show the HOA something myself." Their faces drained of color. Without another word, I stepped back inside and returned with my laptop. I opened it right there on the porch, turning the screen toward them. Their own faces stared back at them from the footage, crystal clear recordings from my security camera. Clip after clip showed them striding up my porch, snatching packages, and walking away laughing. It wasn't just one or two. It was weeks of theft, each one undeniable. The sisters gasped, stumbling over their words. That's fake. You edited that," one stammered. But before they could sputter another excuse, a voice called from across the street. "What's going on here?" It was Mrs. Peterson, leaning on her cane, followed by Mr. Alvarez and a few more curious neighbors. They had noticed the confrontation and wandered over. Perfect timing. "Come take a look," I said, angling the laptop so everyone could see. The crowd gathered, eyes widening as the footage played. Gasps turned into chuckles, chuckles into outright laughter. Mr. Alvarez slapped his knee. I knew it. Porch pirates, caught red-handed. The Karen sisters tried to protest, their words tripping over each other. "It's not what it looks like. We were just holding it for him. We were protecting the neighborhood." But no one believed them. The evidence was too clear. And worse, their reputation was already in tatters after the rat fiasco. This was the final nail in the coffin. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire. Neighbors shared it in the community group chat, tagging the HOA board members. Comments flooded in. Finally, some justice. I knew those two were trouble. They should be banned from HOA meetings permanently. By evening, the HOA president himself came knocking on their door. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know how it went. Stern voices, the sisters whining protests, followed by the president shaking his head in disgust. Word later spread that the sisters had been fined heavily and put on probation with the HOA if they caused one more disruption. They'd face legal action. For the next week, the Karen sisters vanished from public life. No lounging on their porch, no yelling at delivery drivers, no fake neighborhood meetings. They became ghosts, hiding behind their curtains while the neighborhood enjoyed a peace it hadn't known in years. Kids rode their bikes freely. Delivery trucks came and went without fear. For the first time, the block felt like a real community again. And as for me, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. I hadn't just gotten revenge, I had ended their reign of entitlement. My little rat-filled package had started a chain reaction that finally exposed them for who they really were. One evening, as the sun set and the neighborhood settled into calm, I stood on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee. Across the street, Mr. Alvarez raised his glass in a silent toast. Mrs. Peterson waved from her rocking chair. I smiled, nodding back. The war with the Karen sisters was over, and for once, Justice had squeaked its way into victory.